The Dresden Codex, or Codex Dresdensis, is one of only 4 surviving Maya books in existence. It's filled with hieroglyphs and calculations testifying to the complexity of Mayan science and culture. Now, the fact that this strata is one of only 4 of its kind struck you odd. Well, there's a reason. When Spanish friars arrived in the Americas in 1500s, they viewed Mesoamerican codices as pagan artifacts and worked to burn every single book they could find. As a result, only 4 have survived to the modern day. Now, though this example was a long time ago and in a place far from here, it's not as distant as you might think. It's an early example of globalization. The Spanish imposed their culture and economic systems onto another society, an act which indigenous people still suffer for today, and an act which we can see in all areas of the world. Now, first, we should provide context before taking a full stance. Catherine Coe from Harvard Business School defines globalization as the increase in the flow of goods, services, capital, people, and ideas across international boundaries. The main debate in globalization lies in whether or not this global exchange is ultimately beneficial or detrimental. Given the extent and influence of globalization, there are, of course, myriad viewpoints and arguments to be made, meaning that this topic is not easily answered. Now, this question is important given the modern influence of globalization. It's impossible to deny that it vastly impacts all of us today, though one aspect stands out. Western culture in particular is notoriously aggressive and has a greater influence than any other region. Brands such as Amazon, Nike, and McDonald's exist in every corner of the modern earth. As such, many debates on this aggressive form of cultural influence, just like globalization overall, revolve around whether or not it ultimately does more harm than good, though the evidence strongly suggests the latter. While Western cultural diffusion has facilitated global interconnectedness, it also imposes cultural norms that erode cultural diversity, intensify inequality, and harm individual well-being worldwide. So, that was kind of my claim. One of the largest exchanges that globalization induces is with culture. Regional cultures from all over the world can interact with and experience one another, though Western culture in particular exploits this process. Historically, globalization was used by cultures to enforce their beliefs and values among others, and Western culture today is also guilty of this. For an example, we can look at the Mexican city of Acapulco. According to Michael Griffin from the Department of Communication Media Studies at Malacaster College, Acapulco, a Mexican city as pictured, is a historic city famous for its unique cultural heritage. However, the arrival of Western tourists and businesses to support them, such as Nike and Target, has severely hampered the place's individual culture and uniqueness, and also indigenous peoples have suffered. As such, crime rates and rates of drug use and suicide have increased amongst locals in the city as Western tourism has increased. Though these effects aren't just limited to the physical world. Ji-hoon Park from the University of South Korea also claims that the arrival of Netflix in East Asia has also forced conformity amongst Korean media, again eroding cultural diversity. As we can see, Western culture actively works to erode local cultures and instead replace them with homogenous consumerist brands that prioritize conformity and capitalism over heritage and diversity. Ultimately, this paves the way for Western cultural dominance, something we should all be wary of. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Central America, they didn't just burn books, they started economic dominance too, and something again that modern Western cultures are also guilty of. Though it's frequently stated that globalization fosters economic growth worldwide, the reality is rather distorted. Kenny Amy from the University of Wollongong asserts that these benefits are highly disproportional. While Western developed countries enjoy economies of scale and faster than ever production times, this often comes at a severe cost to underdeveloped countries. As Rachel Monroe from The Atlantic further elaborates, countless workers overseas are forced to work long hours in dangerous conditions, often for unfair wages, and with certainly no regard for the environment or individual well-being. This reveals the danger of enforcing Western trends. Though items are cheaper for citizens in us Western countries, it's hard to justify the aforementioned cost. Furthermore, this Western enforcement of economic conformity causes greater instability amongst underdeveloped countries, and the global wealth gap worsens. Essentially, rich countries get richer and poor countries get poorer. As Research FDI summarizes, economic conformity doesn't always lead to prosperity. Instead, Western countries exploit poor ones to keep up with their trends. But yet, though us citizens in America do get to enjoy the rare upsides of this, we're not entirely spared from all the benefits of Western cultural diffusion. As previously mentioned, the benefits of Western diffusion aren't shared fairly. Spanish soldiers bathed in riches and fame from their conquest, while Mesoamerican natives watched their families be murdered and enslaved and their culture forced into oppression. Again, though less extreme, we can see continuity with modern globalization. As Lisa Jameson has found, indigenous and advantaged groups suffer due to globalization. People such as Maori and Inuit groups experience high rates of drug use and suicide due to impoverished civil situations in life caused by the influx of Western culture. Western cultural diffusion has not only taken away their land and lifestyle among these peoples, among others, but given them no choice but to accept this new Western culture. As a result, many also experience adverse health effects. As the Ecuadorian natives call it, mala alimentación, or the rise of is caused by consumption of cheap but processed and easy Western foods, and it is attributed to the rise of obesity and heart disease in their communities. And this is also due to natives no longer being able to access traditional diets, which are healthier for them but are harder to obtain due to modern time and labor demands, again enforced by the work culture of Western countries. Now, in our own country, we can also see negative effects from this, not just in the physical aspect, as in the obesity epidemic in America, but also in the mental one. Neoliberal societies closely tied to globalization experience significant adverse effects to the mental health of the individual, even in developed countries. Anna Zero from the University of Maryland claims that the increases in mental illness and distress are due to neoliberal economic policies and ideologies when discussing trends of mental health in the United States. Apparently, globalization and the diffusion of Western culture in particular is damaging to the well-being in individual aspects. And ironically, not even countries that force their own culture are spared. It seems that Western culture is bad for us all, and perhaps we should remember this. Perhaps fast fashion and social media aren't just harming poor countries, they're eating away at us too. Of course, as I previously stated, globalization, and therefore Western culture too, is a multifaceted topic we must concede it can also bring about positives. Particularly, we can see improvements in economic and technological aspects. As Research FDI puts it, globalization has led to increased economic activity and higher levels of economic growth, along with facilitating the spread of new technologies and knowledge across borders, and Western culture is a driving factor for this. Furthermore, interactions between cultures leads to syncretization, producing new and unique cultures that are more accessible for all those involved. All in all, Western culture does indeed bring about economic growth, technological advancement, and cultural awareness wherever it goes, and we cannot ignore these positive upsides. But yet, these positives aren't without flaws, and they're not as universal as one would hope. Though some economic benefits are brought about, as I previously discussed, they are largely hoarded by Western countries, while underdeveloped countries often receive little reward. The same goes for technological benefits. While technology becomes cheaper and more accessible for Western citizens, many citizens of underdeveloped countries often do not have the financial means to purchase technology for themselves, partially due to the unethical business practices caused by Western dominance I previously mentioned. Additionally, while cultural syncretization can appear appealing to some, as June Park and Kenny Amy would agree, acceptance of a new syncretized culture often requires giving up part or whole of a person's original culture, again contributing to the cultural erosion caused by Western globalization. Essentially, though not all of the effects of Western culture are malevolent, they often come with strings attached that make the process far more damaging than it may seem. In conclusion, Western cultural diffusion has severe negative impacts for cultures, economies, and communities worldwide. Thus often said to be a force of good meant to civilize all the peoples of the world, the reality is far from this statement. When interacting with economies and people worldwide, it's important to consider the true implications of our actions. Perhaps the next time you buy from Shein or wear Native American headdress for Halloween costume, ponder on whether you're enjoying globalization or contributing to a modern Spanish conquest. These are my sources.
A couple of questions for you. Sorry, the clapping is always. We'll do it after. Yeah, you're good with time. We'll do the clapping after oral defense questions. For future, I should have told you that before we started. Sorry for the awkward pause there. Your first question, Caden. Did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
While my focus was always on the negative effects of globalization, the subclaims had a small change. At first, I was going to discuss the environmental impacts, as the stimulus source Ultra-Fast Fashions Eating the World mentions this, and I found a good and credible article from Earth.org that I could definitely connect well. However, I eventually found it rather difficult to incorporate this with the rest of my argument, as I began to narrow my focus down to Western cultural influence instead of just globalization, so I ditched the search for environmental impact evidence in favor of sources discussing culture, economy, and well-being, even though the former was easier to find evidence on.
Okay, good. And your last question for oral defense. What are the implications of your findings to your community?
As I mentioned, particularly in my conclusion, us American citizens are a part of Western culture. It is therefore up to us to determine if our actions, for example, purchasing fast fashion clothes, will contribute to these negative effects of globalization. Due to the integration of culture into our everyday lives and geographical location, it can be difficult to imagine that what we do actually harms other parts of the world. However, my findings show that we must do our part to help combat the unfairness caused by the spread of our culture, our fault or not. Small actions such as choosing a local business over Shein can help us as a community fight the spread of Western cultural dominance.
Okay, good work. And you're done.